Hey everyone, this is Bryon Morrison, CEO and co-founder of Proxxy, your executive multiplier. Welcome to another edition of the Leaders List, where we examine the big subjects that CEOs of scaling businesses are wrestling with, and then we'll interview some specialists in our network that have been there, done it, and can help you think differently about it. In this edition, we're going to discuss preparing for exit. We could also just call this creating value in your company, because they really do work hand in hand. When we first get started working with a company, we often hear the question, what do you think my company's worth? And after we have a discussion about that, the next question is usually, how do I make it worth more? And so we have a great guest this time for the Leaders List to talk about it, about that subject of liquidity events. How do you prepare for it? And he's really fantastic because he's seen it from every angle of the table, whether it's investor, buyer, operator, advisor. So let's all welcome Rick Groesch to the Leaders List.
Hey, how are you doing today? Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we're thrilled to have you. I mean, one of the reasons that we wanted to get you on this is what I just mentioned. You have seen this from every angle, and it's natural for executives to want to try and figure out, like, what is the value of my company? And how do I improve the value of my company? That's probably the most important part. So why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you have seen this from every angle, and then we'll get into some of the tactics.
Great. Well, no, I appreciate it. I think, a little bit about my background. I've spent a good portion of my life in much more of the marketing realm, but then I became a commercial officer of a public company about 15 years ago, 16 years ago now. And we took that company private and sold it. So I fell in love with the process then. I mean, it was amazing to see be on that side of it, right? You're the actual company itself. You were wanting to actually transact. We were wanting to find out what our next step was. And we took it from a public company, which was a small public company, to a private company, and then sold it. And when we did that, I think I saw just the vast range of an array of people that are out there that don't necessarily know what their business is really worth, and the excitement of, oh, this is what I need to do. They get a roadmap. So I now have been working with Western Commerce Group over in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a kind of a small to middle market, mostly middle market boutique shop. We've done a little over $9 billion in transactions. So we've got big numbers for a boutique shop. But we get a chance to work with all different types and only private industry. So each and every day I have these conversations now about somebody who wants to either transact their business or really just understand a little bit more about what they need to do next, because they know they're going to need to do it in the future.
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to specifically talk with you is I know a lot of people who help out from a money perspective, or transactions, brokers, investment bankers, and there's a lot of good people in that space, and there's also a lot of people who are just in it for the transaction. And what I've always enjoyed about talking with you and working with you and getting counsel from you is that you really do invest in understanding the person. And I think that's such an important part of that. It'd be interesting for me to just kind of get a feel for, where'd that come from? Like, what in your background makes you care so much about watching that person be successful in the process?
Well, I think part of it was, so a couple of things. I'm a military brat. I was raised all over the world, so I have an opportunity to meet so many different people from around the globe, right? And getting a chance to hear their stories and hear what they're passionate about. And really, when you start talking about business owners, they all started this because they were passionate about something. They were passionate about a product, a service. They were wanting to increase somebody else's lives. None of them did it really just specifically to say, you know what, I'm miserable about this, but I'm going to go make some money doing this. They're always been passionate about it, and they found a reason why they did it. And that's why it's been 10, 15, 20, 25 years that they've built and grown those companies. So I think hearing each of their stories throughout that time, also experiencing from when we were being bought, when we were actually selling ourselves, being actually approached by such a wide variety of people. And you did see people who cared. You saw people who saw our vision for the future. And then you also saw people who were, hey, they were just wanting to take advantage of what they had at the time. They knew what they had in what we were getting ready to do. And they were going to try to take advantage of the monetary side of it really quickly. And so for me, I look at it, and if somebody's built a company, let's say it's been over 30 years, and they've taken the care, they've hired people, they've brought along people that are now considered family, very much so, and you don't want to see them be taken advantage of. And oftentimes you'll find an owner operator don't really necessarily know what the value of their business, because truly the value of your business is what somebody else is willing to pay for it. What our job, what your job, what the owner's job is to do is to get it ready and position it so people can actually see not only the tangible benefits, what you're going to see on the numbers, but also the intangible benefits of that company, because that's really what obviously gets you that a little bit more on that value when you're trying to transact.
Well, so talk about that a little bit. How do you interact differently? What is it about Western? What is it about, we talked a little bit about you, but what kind of process do you go through that is different than the other investors?
Right. Well, I think for us, so we're an M&A and advisory and a capital advisory shop. So, and it's like I said, it's a boutique. That's just kind of fancy speak for saying we help buyers buy companies, we help sellers sell their companies, and then we help those types of companies also find capital to build on the growth or the goals that they have put out for themselves. So if I had to split it up, I'd say we're about 40% buy side, 50% sell side, and about 10% capital advisory. Again, they're usually established businesses. But what we do is we start off with the other things that they want to do in life. So from a sell side perspective, I'll sit down with somebody and I really care less about what the money outcome is at the beginning, because the money is going to come. As I told you, when you're talking to a potential buyer, they're the ones that are going to set what they want to purchase for. They're going to place the value, but it's going to be based on the way we market it together with the owners. But it's really understanding what's that next phase of life. I mean, are you actually going to want to retire? You've been doing it for 25 years. Are you really going to be able to step away from this? Are you going to be able to, after a couple of years, say, you know what? There's only so much golf there's to be played. And so therefore I'm going to jump back into it. Well, that's a little hard when you've sold your company for a lot of money, and then they're not going to want you to come back and build another successful company and compete with them. So those are things that we have to sit down and have a conversation and understand the psychology of the person first. Is there family things that are going on? Are there health issues? What are the things that they want to portray? What's the reason why they're going to transact? And I always tell everybody, no matter where you are in the process, no matter whether you want to do it today or whether you want to do it 15 years from now, the idea is always to really understand where you are right now. It never hurts to understand what you do, or what you do and what that value is worth to somebody who might buy it. So what we sit down and we provide, we don't charge a retainer. We don't charge our expenses. We believe that pulls in the opposite way of trying to actually transact, because then it's set on a specific timeline, or you've got people questioning, well, why did you go to this meeting? Or did you really need to go to this meeting? Ours is 100% success fee. And it's because we know what we've done over 27 years and being able to be that successful. We know we're going to be able to help these people. It might take 6 months. It might take 2 years. We don't care, but it needs to be the absolute right thing to happen. And they need to understand that too. So oftentimes as we go through the psychology of it, then we get into the numbers and we tell them, hey, we're looking here and we see a couple things you need to do. And, if you just did this a little bit different, you can't just make the change and expect somebody to say, oh, you made the change, so I'm going to go ahead and pay you more. They need to see the proof is in the pudding over 6 months or a year. And you start to see that EBITDA grow, or you start to see your total revenue grow. You start to see your cost of goods, your COGS go down. And those are all things that we help with them and advise them with the understanding that there is no pressured timeline.
It's really smart to think about the personal understanding, because so oftentimes, the majority of the times when a deal falls apart, it's because the person's at the table looking at it and they're staring into the abyss. I mean, that big check that comes back isn't necessarily what they were looking for, right? So we really do have to understand their personal interests. I think it's almost a 50-50 thing in the beginning when you start talking about that. But in terms of, let's assume that the person's ready to exit, or even if they're not ready to exit, they want to understand how they're growing value.
Mm-hmm.
What's the advice you would give somebody as a, like if you're selling a house, we talk about, invest your money in the kitchen and the bathrooms, right? Because you know that there's a great return on that. Where do you invest your time and money if you're a founder of a company to get ready for exit, or to get ready to be in a power position if you want to go buy other companies?
Yeah, I think so. Really, where it is, it's dependent upon who the buyer is going to be, of course. But, as a general rule, we would always say when somebody's going to buy your company, they're going to want a next layer of management, right? Because if you're going to sell your company, you've been there for 27 years, you're really wanting to actually go step back and take some time and enjoy what you've built, but at the same time, enjoy the financial success that you've been able to create through that. Well, you can't do that if you're the only one who knows what's going on in your business. If it's solely dependent on you, that's going to be a difficult thing to transact, because you are the business. And so making sure that you have a next layer of management, that layer of management that's going to stay and be solid and understand your business wholly. And that provides a significant amount of value to the person that's going to buy it. Whether that's a strategic buyer, whether that's a financial buyer, doesn't really matter. It's always a good thing to see that next layer of management be built in there. Second thing would probably be technology, right? I mean, everybody, there's long ago is the day where you're actually keeping books on paper. Although if I have to be honest, we've seen that in other instances, but so is keeping your books in Excel or minor programs that aren't translatable to the next business. Most of these businesses do them in QuickBooks. Most of them do them in different types of software that are very easy to be able to be translated over to that next business. But again, we have to be able to go in and look at all of their numbers, talk about their management, talk about what their advancements in their software and their technology. And then lastly, if it's an equipment-based business, it's understanding what equipment, what assets that they have, and what's the value of those assets. I'll use construction. We do a lot in construction at times. So as you can imagine, when you're dealing with trucks and front loaders and different types of heavy machinery, that stuff has wear and tear on it. So as you're working on that, you have to make sure that you maintain that. And the best piece of advice I could give anybody, regardless of when they start to transact or when they're thinking about it, is if you're doing your business and it's successful right now, and the way you're doing it has been successful, for the last 10, 15, whatever years, when you start that opportunity for a transaction, do not change your business practices. Don't go doing anything different, because it could take 6 months. It could take a year. You may come back and, just as you said, you may say, get a little freaked out right at the end when you're getting ready to close and say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And say, I don't know if I want to do this. That's why there's so much planning up front to get them ready for what that's going to be. So you don't want to change any of your business practices while you're in the middle of transaction, or even while you're marketing your transaction. Because again, if it was successful in the past, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And because there's obviously that opportunity to have it dip down or do something different. Don't take your eye off the ball. Don't take your eye off the business. So
that's so easy to say, hard to do, right? Because there's such an excitement once you start marketing the business and you start going to the meetings, and that's a really cool experience for a lot of folks that are selling their company for the first time. But you're 100% right. From a Proxxy perspective, that's what we always try and say is, which part is going to be harder for you to pay attention to, the day-to-day in your business or the sales process and the minutia of that. And so that's really where the Proxxy steps in, is to be able to allow you to stay focused on the most important thing at that time. So that was really helpful to understand succession planning, technology, understanding your assets. One question I have about technology. So we work with a lot of services firms, and when you hear technology, a lot of people think, oh, I got to go create IP, or I have to go create this thing that is a technology product. And I think just to be clear, what you were talking about is, are you leveraging the technologies out there from a service perspective to be able to make sure you are as efficient and effective as possible, and not necessarily to go, hey, let me go create this product that is going to give me a huge multiple, right?
Yeah. And I mean, look, not every one of these companies, I mean, the vast majority of the companies are not tech companies out of Silicon Valley that need to have some sort of mind-blowing technology that's got some sort of patent somewhere and that everybody's going to use for a certain amount of time, and then somebody else is going to come along. Most of these businesses are created and just need to be efficient, right? They need to maximize what they have. They need to maximize their spend. And I'm glad you touched on one other thing there. And, not only the technology side, but if you're going to invest in your business and you're going to invest in the right assets, and you're going to invest in the right management, and you're going to invest in the right technology, then when you're thinking about doing this, like Proxxy and or our services, or a good M&A attorney, you want to make sure you have built the right team around you, because you're right. When you're trying to transact, the last thing you want to do is take your eye off the ball, because that's not where somebody is coming in taking advantage of anything. If you've been making X amount of dollars over the last number of quarters or years, and then you're in the middle of a transaction and you're the only one who's paying attention to that transaction, and it's a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work, not only getting your company ready, but then actually transacting that company. What happens is people, all of a sudden you see revenue dip, or you might see COGS go up, or you might see something happen where their quarter doesn't end the way they wanted to. And that company who's coming in to buy you is going to revise their offer. And it's natural. And the answer cannot be, oh, well, it's because I was trying to sell my company to you, because they're like, okay, well, now it's more dependent upon your vision and what you're doing. So I would always say, weigh the cost benefit analysis when you're building that team to help you transact, just as if you would build your team when you're trying to grow your company. So, and understanding what that means. So again, there's a lot of people out there. Have conversations and be with the ones who you could actually sit down and go have a beer with, sit down, have a really good, honest conversation about what you want to do with your life. If you can't have that with any one of your advisors, if you can't have that with your lawyer, your M&A lawyer, then they're not the right person. It really is about the relationship, and about somebody who you're going to be able to entrust something that took so long for you to build. You need to entrust that to somebody. So take the time up front to really look at those types of people.
So Rick, when you were on the buy side and you were looking at, in a PE firm, you were thinking about how do we acquire these companies, but then we're going to increase the value of them over time. You've already made the decision. I like the team. I like the way they're using technology. I like the assets. They're of the right value, and we can all agree to that. When you take in the company, what's the first thing that you would look at? I know that was in a previous role, but what do you look at and go, okay, I'm going to jump on that and I'm going to increase the value tremendously? Like, what were the things that were the easy button for you as an investor?
Sure. So again, it depends on the type of company, and we do buy side. We buy for some of our very specific clients. So we still look at that stuff as well when we are trying to think about what's the best option for them. We sit as kind of principals for our buyers. So while they look to us to give them great advice about what the next value is going to be out of the company that we're purchasing. But when we do purchase a company, when we look and we've already bought off on the management team, we've already bought off on all of the technology, oftentimes the very next thing we're going to look at is what other types of efficiencies that are out there. And those efficiencies could be anything, not from personnel perspective. That's a recipe for disaster. And that's where private equity gets bad, kind of a bad name, is that people are going to come in and cut headcount, drop to the bottom line, and just increase that. That's a recipe for disaster. So when we were purchasers, when we're buyers, and the buyers that we do represent now, we are buy and hold. So private equity gets, there's definitions of two different elements of private equity. You get guys who want to come in, buy it, maximize its value, turn around and sell it between 3 and 5 years and return capital to whoever's the ones who put in the cash. The second is a buy and hold model. And that's really where we believe is a much more beneficial model, because then you can talk about what sustained growth is. I don't need to capture that growth in the very first 6 months. I don't have to capture it in the first 12 months. But what we've done is built out models of how can we, along with our connections or the other companies that we've worked with, introduce the company that we just purchased to new customers, to new service providers, to other technologies that might actually cost less because we've got everybody across the same platform. So we look at those, but those are things that can't just be turned on in 5 seconds and be monetized within the first 6 months. So you really have to have the right mindset of, I want to see this thing grow long term, and so therefore we're going to buy and hold, and eventually down the road it'll transact again. Maybe it'll transact again. There are certain private equity groups that are out there right now that are backed by family offices or just straight family offices that want to buy and hold model. And I applaud those models, because really what you're doing is you're continuing the legacy of the other, of the previous buyer, the owner, and saying, hey, we've got the money, we got the financial wherewithal to be able to put it in. And now you're going to be able to grow to things that the owner just really didn't have either the financial assets to be able to do it themselves. But also, you got to remember, when an owner builds a company up and they build up that nest egg, that's a lot larger of I don't want to say gamble, but yeah, gamble. When you're saying, oh, I'm going to gamble my nest egg on something and I'm 60 years old, there's a lot less runway for you to want to go and enjoy it. So that's really where private equity has a benefit. They come in, and if they do it right, they come in and they look at it and say, I want to build this over the long term. How do I do that? I am going to look at efficiencies, but I'm also going to look at more about growth. What can I do to supercharge, pour gasoline on the fire? All of those different things that you hear all the time. But what am I going to do to provide my relationships, my connections, our capital, and also our time? Those are the three biggest things: capital, time, and relationships. And if you're putting in all three, you can see that type of a company grow. And if you use it through that lens of what are those things that I can provide as a private equity person or a family office, what are those three things that can actually make this company grow, you're going to be pretty successful pretty quickly. But again, it's no real time horizon that you need to be trying to do something in 3 years. Yeah,
in your scenario.
Yeah.
And if you think about, so I would imagine, like, you look at companies all the time and go, that is not a sales and marketing engine, right? I mean, you have not built that yet, or you don't really have a strong operating system, but you've been successful anyway. And I like the people behind it. And so systems and engines and things that you can put in to create consistency in the business are things that I hear all the time that PE firms will look at, or investors will look at and suggest, hey, I'd like you to get that done.
Right.
I just always like to talk to executives about, why don't you do that before you go to the table? Like, let's start thinking about, because it's just a matter, even if you don't want to exit, it's just a matter of how do you build a solid business and that is able to replicate success. And if you have that, you're going to look like a better buy option anyway. So that way you can stay focused on not the functional, mechanics of how to build that company, but you can, like you said, you can bring in specific relationships that they just never have access to. That is a much easier lift than going in and changing something, that's operational.
You're right. And when we start talking about very traditional private equity, you're going to see when they want to come in and buy, they would like to buy something that's just not on easy street, but kind of on easy street. They don't want to have to make a lot of changes. They want to be able to see that they can make more of their connections and build the revenue because of the people they know, not necessarily the money that they have to spend to put into it. So I absolutely agree with you. And I have to say that one of the things in our conversations through Proxxy, being able to say and sit down and have conversations with their clients and say, this is what you should do to make you more valuable. Because yes, you will be more valuable at exit if you've already done those things. The other thing is, it also opens it up to a wider variety of people and other potential buyers when you already have those things done. When you've been limited, when you don't have certain things up to speed, there are people that will buy you, but again, it's either going to be a situation where somebody's going to want to come in and take advantage of it, or you're going to have a limited number of people who do it. Now, we're a little different. As I mentioned, we don't shotgun everything out. We're not going to take a sim and put it out to 200 different people and wait for them to call us. Prior to our transactions with our clients, we've already identified companies, private equity groups, public entities that are in the market, have already been spending money. We know where they want to invest. We've already had conversations with them about a wide variety of things. So we don't take it out and make it public, because worst case scenario that can happen is a smaller company, a private company goes out there, they smatter it all over the world. They tell everybody what's going to happen, and then they don't transact. What's happened in the middle time is all your competitors have paid attention to it. Oftentimes they'll try to find out what numbers you have. They're out there talking, oh, they're going to sell, and it could end up hurting your business. So we try to be very targeted, keep it very low key. But we hit those right ones that we've done plenty of research on to know that it's going to be a success, so that not everybody out in the market knows that you're for sale. It's never good to let everybody else know that you're for sale. There's kind of two different mindsets there. Some people feel like if everybody knows, then it'll get into a bidding war. Well, first thing that most of these private equity groups will tell you is, maybe in a public setting, but we don't work in public groups. We don't work for public companies. Bidding wars don't happen the way you think they happen. It's a small, whatever industry you're in, it's a small industry. Everybody tends to know each other. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Or whatever. So
right.
You see that's out there. It's a lot less than 6 degrees. It's usually 2 at the most.
Yeah. That's, it is interesting, because there's there's an ego play to this, right? Where executives look at this and go, oh, that's so cool. I want the PR announcement. I want I want to make sure I get my absolute best deal. But again, it's not necessarily about the exit. If you've done the work to create a great firm, then you will have those opportunities. And so it's really more about just let's start thinking. I always tell everybody it's 2 to 3 year process is what you really ought to be thinking about. And it's not because, there's a billion things that have to get done, even though there are a lot of things that have to get done in that process. It's really just because you want to, like you said, you want to be able to show proof, and you want to be able to look at that and live in it for a while and go, hey, it's kind of like somebody remodels their home and they go, I don't want to sell this. I love it now. So
it happens. Yeah, it happens all the time.
It can be like that. Like a lot of companies we work with, they'll say, no, I think I do want to look at this in a couple of years. We start working through it, and they start realizing, I'm not a slave to this company anymore, because I do have a good management team, and I do understand succession planning, and my operating system works. And then all of a sudden they go, I kind of like it. Let's just keep doing that. So that's fine. It's about
really
getting in that power position.
You are in when you place yourself in that position, having knowledge. And look, back when we were kids, at least, there was this wonderful thing that says, little NBC, the more you know, that's used to shoot across the screen, or knowledge is power, and all these wonderful little lines. But it truly is. I mean, knowledge and real knowledge about your business and what other people would want it for and why they like it is always incredibly powerful. And you're right. When somebody sees it, and they tend to get a little reinvigorated in their business, because remember, they're usually down at a much lower level. They're in the business every single day. And through this process, they kind of get pulled out a little bit, and they get to see it at a grander scale. And oftentimes, and it's never at closing. It's never right at the day of closing, but it's usually a couple of weeks before closing. You'll get somebody who will call you and say, I don't know. I mean, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to transact? And you go back and you remind them about the conversations that you did have. Because again, it depends. It depends on if you're in your 40s and your early 50s versus you're in your 60s. You have a different mindset each time. And, in their 40s, you might say, hey, you know what? I still want to run with this for 5 more years. And by the way, that's great. The majority of our relationships, the majority of what we have done have been relationships that we've had 3, 4, 5 years at a minimum, all the way up to our not our most recent, but one of our large transactions at the end of 23 was a company that we'd worked with for 21 years. Like we'd known them for 21 years. And it wasn't as if they'd been planning it the entire time, but they knew eventually that was what was going to happen. So over the years, we just keep in touch. You have conversations. You talk to them about their kids. You talk to them about the ever-changing landscape of the personal world as well as the professional world. And as those come up, we've talked to them at different times about, hey, now's not the right time for you to do it. You know what? It's a different type of a market. Or, hey, we're seeing winds shift in your favor. If you've ever thought about it, maybe this next year is the right time to look at it. And if they keep up with their valuation, they understand what their value is, and they keep following the roadmap that they've laid out for themselves, as well as companies like you guys have helped them out with, they get a chance to know what they're doing, see it, and always know that they're making extra value, that they're not slipping backwards, so that when they do make that decision, it's the right time whenever they make that decision. So we enjoy it because oftentimes those relationships become, I can't tell you, I think every single one of the sell side things that I've ever done, as well as even the buy side, but more on the sell side, you really build those relationships. And after you've sold their company and they're no longer part of it, we're still going duck hunting together. We're still going skiing, go skiing together. We'll still hang out and go grab dinner, or go grab a drink together and talk. So it's great to kind of build really long-standing relationships and friendships through there. And as you know, that's why it's so important, because it's very, very few. And when I say very few, it's an anomaly to have somebody build a company, sell it, and then turn around and build another company and want to sell it. So this isn't like you're trying to build another person and I'm going to sell your second company down the road. There are some, but most of them aren't like that. Most of them transact one time in their life. And those are the ones that are fun to work with. It's great to see them. It's great to see them, their goals reached. And it's also great after the transaction happens to see what happens in their personal life. Some of them will call back and say, well, I think I'm going to go back and consult for the company that I just sold to. And that's happened. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And they help them with, relationship transfer and knowledge transfer, but even more so, they've been doing it for 27, 30 years. And so they've got a lot of knowledge in that head of theirs that they can use and that the new company can use. So it's always nice to see that happen. And again, good relationships and good people, and the business will happen. It really will.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with somebody recently, and he said, I would assume like 90% of all small to medium-sized businesses are unable to sell.
Ooh,
and I think just the opposite of that. But I think that requires creativity, and you have to think differently about selling. What's your take on that?
Oh, that's a wow. I mean, that number to me is kind of unfathomable, right? Now, I would agree a vast majority aren't ready to sell, right? Maybe if you put it on that, it's not ready to sell yet, right yet. But when you talk about small and middle market companies, most of them have a really good opportunity for an exit, because there are others that are out there who don't. It takes a different person to start a company and build it than it does to take one who's in the middle and grow it. Two different personalities quite often. So there's all of those people that are out there in walks of lives that are ready to take something that's already been built and has a strong foothold and take it to that next level. So I wouldn't agree with the 90% by any means, but I would say that a good majority don't necessarily know what they need to do to transact, regardless of whether that's this year or next year or 5 years from now. So I would agree with that. There are companies, of course, that are not transacting. They're meaning that it's so wrapped up in one person and nobody else can do it, or the financials just aren't there to make it right for somebody else. And that, honestly, for me, it hurts, because you look at an owner, you look at somebody who builds something, and you don't ever want them to have this feeling that there's not value in their company. There's always value in their company. It's just other people's perception of it is what drives the market. So it's what other people believe the value of your company to be. And oftentimes it's not whether they actually believe that you or your company is valuable. It's that they can't see how they can make it grow. They can't see how they can build it. They don't see what little pieces you've put in place that are something that they can grow or build off of moving forward. So, again, I would say more likely, I'd flip that. I'd say I agree with you. It's 90% are transactable. Maybe not today, but certainly with the help of advisors and having conversation and saying, hey, you might need to take some of this, and some of your product line, by the way, doesn't make you any money. So that's hurting you. And I know you're passionate about it, but is it really something that if you want to transact, you probably should get rid of that? Or you need to invest a little bit more here over the course of the next couple of years, and you can grow that. And this is how that'll affect your EBITDA and ultimately your value of your company.
Yep. And there is that line that, you're going to exit your company one way or another. It's on your feet or on your back, right? So, but I love the idea of thinking about having the conversation. And again, you don't have to exit. You have to build value in your company. You have to get to a point where that company becomes more valuable, because that's better for you. You make more money, your employees make more money, your clients are happier. So the idea of just improving your company is really the right intent. And if you are doing things that other people will find valuable and they're willing to buy your company, then that means that you're building the value in your company. It's good for you, good for your future. So I love the idea of saying, and you can be creative, like you can sell the company to the employees. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about. You can look for another generation, bring them in and start to mentor them over time, and you help facilitate and fund the sale. I mean, there's so many things that are different than I'm going to show up at a great big table with all the paper in front of me and I'm going to make signatures, or, now I'm going to DocuSign everything. But that doesn't always happen. There's other ways that it can get done.
No, and I agree. And I think that oftentimes we get people who will come in, different owners, different founders, who will walk in the door, and the first thing they ask us is, okay, well, so I assume if I sell my company, I'm out the next day. And you say, well, first of all, there's multiple ways to transact a company. Yeah. There's multiple ways of still keeping equity. If it is a private equity group who comes in and buys it and is one to sell it in 5 years, how much do you want to keep of it so that you can get a second bite at the apple? Do I want to sell 100% of it out? Do I want to stay on as a consultant for a certain amount of time? That's something that's very important, and everybody needs to understand, especially in small and middle market companies. You're very valuable to that company. Your knowledge is very valuable. Your relationships are very valuable. Nobody is really going to want you out on day one. And if they do, that's a little bit of a red flag, to be honest. So you're going to need to understand what that's going to look like for a 2-3 year period. Oftentimes they're going to want you a minimum of 2 years. Some differences, of course, but also as you're looking at what you're going to do next, as you mentioned, you are, when you're building your company and when you're always looking forward, right? You're always looking forward to what's the next best thing? Who's the competitor that I got to beat out? What's the price point that I have to be at? What's the next service that I need to do when you're growing it? And when that passion starts to wane is probably when you need to start to take a look at, how do I either reinvigorate that passion so I still have that upward trajectory, or how do I then take a step back and let the next one carry the baton, run that next leg of the race faster? And that might be with you as part owner, and it might be with you transacting and walking out the door. So there's a lot of psychology, right? And there's a lot of introspection from a business owner to be able to say, why do I want to do this? When do I want to do this? How do I want to do this? And that often, knowing those things will help us when we want to figure out, do you make it an ESOP? Like, do you sell it to the employees? Do you flip that over as an ESOP? Do you actually want to do a structured management buyout with the other management team that's there? Is this something that needs to transition to your next generation? And oftentimes that's the one thing right now that we're finding is there's a lot of companies that have a next generation that just don't want to have to do with that business. Now, I jokingly say sometimes you'll get those kids, the younger kids out there that will say, well, if it doesn't have an app, it's not cool, so I don't want to run it. And the first thing we continue to say back is, well, it has EBITDA and a really good EBITDA, and that's really cool. So,
That's the killer app.
Yeah, I'll take EBITDA over an app all day long. So, but it is something that you have to take a look at. And is your person the right? Is your next person, your next family member, is it the right person to run your company? And that's a hard conversation, honestly, because what you see in this business is you see a lot of small and middle market companies that have been created by founders and owners, and what they do is they bootstrap at the beginning, just like all of us when we're creating things. And you bootstrap at the beginning and you bring along people who might be family members, might be friends. And at some point, sometimes you get a diamond in the rough and it's well more value. Sometimes you find out that they have a maximum potential. They're not going to be able to reach up over a certain thing. And it's hard. You have to be, we as advisors have to sometimes look at you and say, okay, like it feels like they've reached their maximum potential. Is there somewhere else in the company that they can work? Is there somewhere else that they can provide beneficial assets to the company, whatever that might be? And because almost everybody's not going to want to come in and buy a company and then turn around and axe headcount or do anything like that. But after 6 months, they're going to be doing evaluations, and they're going to want to know that everybody that's there has been working hard. And that's a tough conversation to have too at times.
Well, they're going to do the same evaluation that leader should be doing every 6 months anyway.
Should be doing.
And that's the really hard part, right? I mean, that's a big part of what we tend to do in Proxxy is, force the honest discussion, right? There's nothing wrong with working with family and friends, and that's great, but it's business first. And you have to figure out, like, how are we getting the most out of that person? And how are they enjoying that process too? Because if they're in the wrong spot, they feel it when that square peg gets jammed into a round hole. I mean, that's not right. And so sometimes, we just have to, again, I think it just comes back to honest, transparent conversations. Yeah. And speaking of, I want to thank you, because having folks like you to be able to work with in the space when we're working with our clients, and being able to say, look, we're just going to have an honest discussion, and we can count on that being open and honest and the best thing for the buyer. So it's an amazing feeling. And so that's why we love to be able to team with you. And we want to thank you for your time here today. This has been awesome. Is there anything from a closing perspective you want to share, or anything?
Well, I have to say that's one thing I've always enjoyed about our conversations, our relationships with you and Tony and everybody else on the teams is that, confrontation doesn't have to mean conflict, right? So the fact that you have to confront a situation doesn't mean that it needs to turn out bad. We just need to be, if you have a true, honest motive about it, then confrontation helps you grow. And again, I think oftentimes that confrontation word gets such a bad connotation to it because everybody assumes that it means that we're going to have some massive blowout or fight or whatever it might be. And that's not what it is. I think good, honest, healthy conversations and discussions like we've talked about, good questions, make you stop and think twice. And it also says, all right, I may have to defend this for a second, and I defend it, and either I'm going to it's going to defend it well, or you may actually have an epiphany and say, okay, that's something I need to work on. But you have to have advisors. And that's what, like I said, that's what I've always enjoyed about conversations with you and Tony and the group, is that you're not afraid to ask the right questions. You're not afraid to ask the questions that are going to get people to think. And we try to employ the exact same tactics. Let's have a good, healthy conversation. And, at the end of the day, when you want to transact, we will find you somebody to transact, and we're going to wait until it's the right time. And don't be in a rush. Don't be in a rush to do anything. You weren't in a rush to build your business. So, well, I mean, you're in a rush to get there. You're not in a rush, and you do things methodically. But if you build something over 36 years, 27 years, 22 years, don't try to sell it in 6 months. Take your time, make it right, make it the best thing, and you're going to get the best value at it, and you're going to feel good about what's happened. So
yeah, so good, Rick. This has been awesome. We really appreciate the time. Thanks for being part of the Leaders List.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. You have a great day. All right, Bryon.
All right. Thanks, Rick.